Hi, how y'all doing? Welcome to my new series thingamajiggy, where I just sort of rant unscripted about whatever the hell I want. Today we're gonna talk about the similarities between ASPD and ASD, or, sociopathy and autism, because no one ever talks about it, and this is my channel, and I get to talk about what I want to. So, you look at sociopathy, and basically my understanding of it is that, well, it's like you don't really have much of a personality at first. Like, if you look at American Psycho, and Patrick, I forget his last name, but it doesn't really matter. He doesn't really have an actual personality. He looks at the world around him, and he creates himself and builds himself up to fit into whatever he needs to be, to make sure that he lives, to make sure that he gets on top, to make sure that he gets everything that he wants to. It's all about power, but not all sociopaths are like that. Not all psychopaths are like that. So I'm gonna look at one of my characters, Wilbur, who is a sociopath who also is a narcissist, but we're not gonna focus on that today. Something interesting that I noticed was, well, first of all, I do want to say I actually have autism, so I actually have a little bit more say in this than you might think. But most of this is just me ranting. Anyway, so basically what I'm thinking is that people with autism tend to fixate on things. They tend to, we don't really understand a lot of the world around us because we're so in our heads all the time. We focus on what makes us happy. We don't always understand things. We actually struggle with empathizing with other people, and that can come across as insensitive at times, and sometimes even selfish, when in reality we're just trying to understand the world around us. And people who don't have autism really don't understand this. It's very, very frustrating, very, very difficult. But the interesting thing is that people with ASPD don't feel empathy at all, and they don't feel guilt, which is very different from autism, where we just struggle with empathy. We want to understand people, but it's not always easy, which is why I like to put myself in the perspective of my characters, and I like to give my characters traits and, like, disorders and things that I don't properly understand, so I like to go in deep and really try to research them so that I can properly understand them, and I can properly represent them. So then I actually end up understanding them. I understand that perspective a little bit better, which feels fantastic, but I know it's not always 100% accurate. But with people with ASPD, they don't really care, for the most part. They just don't understand people. And actually, they will very likely, they actually believe that it's an advantage not to feel empathy or guilt, because everything for them is self-preservation, keeping themselves safe, keeping themselves in power. And you might think that that's selfish, and it kind of is, but the whole point to it is not to be selfish. Nothing in the world to them is worthy or can be trusted. Everything is below them, and everything is just sort of, it's not even worthy to them. To look at it from the perspective of someone without ASPD, that's like saying that you can't trust anyone else around you, like you're afraid that everyone's going to hurt you. Not everyone with ASPD actually can feel fear, but the character that I wrote does have a lot of anxiety, so that is actually one of his traits, is that he is actually afraid of people hurting him, which is one reason why he puts himself on the top, and why he views himself as above other people. But part of that is also his narcissism. People with autism don't usually do that. But the similarity that I see there is that both of them struggle with empathy, and both of them are very severely misunderstood for it. People with autism are looked at as being kind of dumb. Like, we're seen as being kind of stupid. And people with ASPD are seen as criminals, which is kind of interesting, because those are two completely different things. Those are completely different. But these two are actually quite similar in behavior. Symptoms and where those symptoms come from and their brain structures are completely different, but they're so similar in how they act and how they think. or not how they think, but it's like, you get what I'm saying. Another interesting thing is that if you're just a sociopath, you might, you want to, like looking at Patrick's case again, you look for all the things that you could be interested in that kind of build up a mask of who you want to be and how you want people to see you, and it's like this perfected mask. You study people around you, you study their emotions, and you study how they present themselves, which isn't empathy. It's studying how they appear. It's studying the facial expressions. And they have this incredibly eerie ability to perfectly replicate it, to look like they are actually imitating those emotions. And they imitate people's interests, they imitate all the things around them to fit in. And I think it's very, very intriguing, because I love it so much. It's so interesting to me. And people with autism do something very similar, where when people with autism will mask, they don't always understand things. Like when I was little, well, this is kind of different, but I didn't understand that love is actually supposed to be heartfelt, and I didn't actually understand that until I was maybe 14, which is normal for people, but not until you're 14. I think that's a little bit too old to start realizing that love is actually supposed to be a feeling, and it isn't supposed to be just a part of life. Though that could also be just like a queer coding thing, but I don't know. Not queer coding. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. That's not what queer coding is. But that's kind of how I see it, if that makes much sense at all. But yeah, and then if you look at the fixations that some autistic people have, like myself, for instance, one of my fixations might be Invader Zim. Someone with ASPD might look at Invader Zim, and they might look at the community that Invader Zim has, and then they might think, oh yeah, this community looks pretty easy for me to replicate. I could really blend into this community. I could really be someone in this community. And then they will try to replicate that, and they will try to study it to the best of their intentions, and they will focus everything on it. It's kind of like they're hyperfixating on it, except they may or may not be interested in it. For Wilbur's case, he actually does have interests. I actually did give him a lot of interests that are quite genuine to him. Unlike Patrick from American Psycho, his mask isn't covering up nothingness. His mask of just complete numbness is suppressing what few emotions he does feel. And then if you remove that mask, it's actually he's very expressive, because he's been suppressing so many emotions for so long. And he actually has interests, what's it called again? Let's see, he has interests in movies, how movies are made. He has interests in 3D art, like clay, sculpting, sewing, and especially taxidermy. In fact, taxidermy is also a huge outlet for him. So that is partially from having NPD, but that's a completely different thing. I don't want to get into a whole character analysis on how his NPD affects him right yet, because we're not talking about NPD today. Maybe I'll do that in another video. I also want to look at another character that I have that actually has autism, who is Max. And I'd like to think that she's on the same place on the spectrum that I am. And yes, I say she, because in the last Headcanon Voices video, I had her voice as Angel Dust, and that's because she used to be a guy, but I have changed her so she is now transgender, where at the start of the series she is male, but later she transitions, but she does go by any pronouns. But Max is autistic, and her fixation is on mechanical technology. So what Wilbur does when he first meets Max is Wilbur actually he's very, very silent on himself. He doesn't talk about himself at all when he's around Max. But he does study Max, and Max is a little bit naive at first. So Max loved mechanical technology, always have loved mechanical technology. Wilbur didn't know what Max was like. Wilbur was kicked out of his house for spoiler reasons, and he was living in the slum on the streets, and Max was the only person who was ever willing to help him. And Max was very, very naive and was like, "Yeah, of course I'll help you. You seem so sad and lonely. I'll be your best friend." And Wilbur's like, "Great, you're a naive little dum-dum, and you've fallen right into my trap." But Wilbur's just using Max because Wilbur wants to use Max to get to, basically just to build himself up until he gets to the top again, because his parents were, like, really, really wealthy, and then when he was kicked out, his status was lowered greatly, because now he's living in the slum. So he's just trying to use Max to get back up to the top, so that he has a good place in society again. So what he does is he studies everything that Max likes, and Max is like, "Yeah, of course I'll tell you all the things that I like. Of course I'll show you everything that I'm interested in," because Max is only 18 years old, a little bit naive, autistic, and loves talking about themselves. Man, I'm all over the place. This is what unscripted looks like. So Max would just sort of show him everything. And eventually Wilbur, he didn't really understand mechanical technology, but he was so good at pretending that he did. He's such a good actor. He was actually in a drama class. She was actually in a drama class and actually was a very great actor, which makes a lot of sense for someone with ASPD. So he studies the mechanical technology a little bit so that he can sort of... So he's like, "Oh my gosh, you like mechanical technology, right?" And Max is like, "Yeah, of course I do." And he's like, "Oh my gosh, same. We could be best buddies." And so what he does is he kind of takes these manipulation tactics to keep Max around, where he tells Max, "You're everything. You're all I have. You're my best friend, and I love you so much." And they're in combat in the streets when they're getting something, or they get into a big, like, gang fight or something, he will chastise Max throughout the entire thing, telling him that Max is unobservant, that he's weak, he's small, can't handle a threat. Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you just throw the barrel at that dog over there? It could have been so easy. You're so slow. Meanwhile, that's really just part of Max being autistic. And the funny thing is, Wilbur believes all the things that he says. Wilbur's legitimately frustrated with Max. He's just so used to acting manipulative and he just doesn't even think about it twice. He just doesn't. His brain just doesn't work like that. He just doesn't stop and think, "Hey, is my yelling at Max gonna end up pushing him away? Is my yelling at Max gonna end up making Max hate me in the future? Am I gonna lose this person because of that?" No, he doesn't think like that. Something interesting that I also noticed is I am autistic, and I also do this with these, like, manipulation tactics. I especially did this when I was little, because I often felt like I wasn't understood. I didn't even know that I felt like this, but I've been looking back on it lately, and I'm like, geez, past Nerd Shark, what did you do? But I used to be a huge habitual liar. I would lie just because it's fun. I used to steal school supplies just because it was fun, because I liked the thrill of getting away with it. I liked sneaking my toys to school because my parents told me not to, just so I could get away with it. I was a huge thrill seeker. And I, even now, still sometimes have thoughts that are like, man, my friend can't hang out with the rest of the group because that means that they are unloyal to me and that they're going to hurt me in the future. And that means that I can't trust them. And I have thoughts like that sometimes where I'm like, why are you going to go spend time with them? Stop doing that. You're going to end up leaving me. And it's like, it's just, I think I've always had a little part of that in my head, because autistic people are usually very misunderstood. So I think I just ended up developing... I just started becoming a habitual liar, and I started to develop I started to almost push people away, but after that stopped working. Like, I was being very, very aggressively myself for a while. Just all of the sex jokes, all of the very, very, very dark jokes, and it was, even when I didn't understand it, all the way in middle school. And after that stopped working, and it just started like being a huge issue, I became a huge people pleaser and a bit of a doormat. Oh, you have this boundary, and this boundary, and this boundary, and this boundary. I will respect everything. I'll respect everything that you are. I will respect all of you, and I will be everything that you need me to be.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay?
And that ended up putting me in an even worse position because I ended up feeling so at fault for everything. So those are just two ways that ASPD and autism are actually very, very similar. I don't know if all autistic people go through something like that, but that's what I went through. And yes, technically people-pleasing is a form of manipulation because you're using a lot of guilt-tripping even though you are feeling guilty. Here's the thing. Most of the time, manipulators believe the things that they're saying. They believe the things that they are telling you because they're a little bit delusional and they don't always understand, which is okay. It's just you have to be very careful around people who end up being a little bit manipulative, because you have to understand you can love a person, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay around them. That doesn't mean that they're safe for you. You can still be friends with them, but it doesn't mean that they should be a huge part of your life. You don't need to tell them all your secrets. You don't need to tell them all the little things about you. Everything that is you could possibly be used against you, so you have to be very, very careful. Man, this video took a big turn. Holy crap, I ended up ranting about a lot. But I think that's pretty much my thoughts on how ASPD and ASD are very, very similar for now. There were a lot of points where I kind of trailed off a little bit, and I deeply apologize for that. This is my first time doing any video with my voice at all. Oh yeah, post-recording Nerdshark here. The persona that I used in this video, his name is Nico. He's a Shanthro, which is like a kind of fish creature thing. His pronouns are he, they. He is 19 years old, and I will not be using him much in the future because he is no longer my main persona, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of info on him, just for fun. Yeah, I think that's it. This is my first actual video with my voice, and it's unscripted because I just wanted to get this video out, because I'm like, man, I really want to just rant about psychology for a bit. So, I hope you guys appreciate it. Bye, I guess. I don't know how to do intros, or outros, I mean.